everyone for attending the Business Recovery and Sustainability webinar series through the St. Louis Regional Chamber. This is our final webinar in the series, and we are talking today about how nonprofits are adapting to change. My name is Tabitha, and I am the Vice President of Investor Relations at the St. Louis Regional Chamber. My co-moderator is Bethany Monahan, our Director of Business Engagement and Membership at the Chamber. Few housekeeping items before we begin. Everyone is automatically muted. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Please submit them via chat, and we will either read them throughout the webinar, or Bethany will read those at the end for our panelists to answer. A recording of this presentation will be available after the webinar is complete. Now, before we get started and have our panelists introduce themselves, I want to give two big shout outs to our amazing sponsors, Technology Partners and Kitty Academy, who is serving St. Louis healthcare and essential businesses in this time of crisis. We appreciate you. So let's get started and meet our amazing panelists. Cheryl, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we're going to move on to Rose.
Hi, thank you so very much, and I'm so very happy to be here. My name is Cheryl Jones. I'm President and CEO of Girls Inc., and I have been amazingly with this organization for almost 7 years. We serve girls ages 5 to 18, and our tagline is inspiring all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And what we try to do is provide educational, recreational, and cultural programs, a safe environment to enable girls to raise their aspirations and realize their potential. I've also served on corporate boards with Reliance and Simmons Community CRA, and I currently continue to serve on boards locally. 17 years I had my own business as president and CEO of Jones & Associates, where I also had some strategies and solutions to corporations. I am very, very excited, and my background continues to be in leadership, culture, complex systems, change management, recruitment, and diversity and inclusion. Even at Girls Inc., I see that every day. So I'm so very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, Rose.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am thrilled to be a part of the panel today and grateful for the opportunity. The LittleBit Foundation, I'm a co-founder. We are 20 years old. Our mission is to break down barriers that stand in front of impoverished children so that they can receive the education that they so deserve. I'm a mother of 3. I'm a grandmother of 3. Some exciting news about me is that my daughter and her husband and their family have lived in Detroit for a few years, and they are moving back on Sunday. So my heart is full while we are so busy here at the LittleBit Foundation making changes. Home life is exciting, and my heart is full. So happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
That's great news. Great news.
Thank you.
Especially on a Thursday. Colonel Dan, and then we are going to go to Tiana.
Very good. Good morning. My name is Dan Jennings. I work with the Salvation Army. I've been doing that for 26 years. My current role is the Divisional Commander. That means a lot to people in the Salvation Army. It doesn't mean anything to people who don't know the Salvation Army, but it means that I oversee the work and mission of the Salvation Army for a segment of the Salvation Army. And the division that I lead right now is called the Midland Division. It includes the state of Missouri and anything in Illinois south of Quincy. So that's the area that we call Midland. I get to do that for the next 7 days, and then I'll do the same role, but for what we call the Northern Division. So my family and I will be moving to Minneapolis at the end of next week. So it's been great to be here in St. Louis, and just as I get to be a part of this group, I have to say farewell and goodbye.
You will definitely be missed. And last but certainly not least, Tiana.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I am Vice President of Marketing and Creative at LaunchCode. If you're unfamiliar with LaunchCode, we are about 6.5 years old. We're a nonprofit in the greater St. Louis area working to make sure that people, anyone with the passion, drive, and aptitude can get a tech education and then enter into the tech field without any barriers, regardless of what their background may look like. I love being a part of that organization and making those kinds of opportunities available for people who would just otherwise be shut out. And I think it has a really big impact on our area.
Thank you for your time today, all of our panelists. One last shout out to technology partners and Kitty Academy for making this webinar possible. And just a reminder to our audience to please submit your questions via the chat and we will answer them at the end of the conversation. So let's jump in. Nonprofits are facing a challenge that they've never seen before, a worldwide pandemic. Suddenly, with a world in crisis, nonprofit organizations of every type and of every mission find themselves in a precarious situation. As jobs are lost, the need for services increase across all factions of society, but donations and other sources of revenue are deeply compromised. Today, we're going to have an open conversation with our panelists and you, our attendees, on how nonprofits are adapting to the change and what the future may look like moving forward. So I'm going to start with Cheryl on this. How has COVID impacted your organization, both positively and negatively?
Okay, I would say thank you for the question. Mostly positively. We created and adapted a playbook. We already had a business continuity plan, but of course it did not address COVID-19. So we jumped into action and put together 3 committees. And one was the business continuity committee. The other one was the PPE. And the final one was the reentry. And with those teams, and all of these were board-led or committees, we wanted to work really quickly to establish 4 or 5 different pieces. One was, how are we going to work remotely? Because that was something we had never done. Health and safety of our kids and staff. We also had to address technology and also making sure that we were communicating in all facets so that people knew exactly what we were doing. So positively, we had to reimagine, recreate, and I also say be agile. Those were the positive pieces. And now if you ask me, because someone would say that was positive, what about negative? Change. That was something that people had to get on board and also adapt really quickly. So the change process moved a little faster for some, but for the most part, everyone was ready to adjust and be agile. So that was how we coped.
Great answer. I'm going to open it up to our other panelists. If Tiana or Colonel Dan or Rose have a comment around COVID impacting your organization.
Yes, it had a huge impact on LaunchCode. We're pretty well known for making sure that our services are delivered in person. One thing that holds a lot of people back from taking a course to learn programming is that doing it online, where sometimes it is free, is really, really challenging for people who have a lot of home responsibilities, maybe multiple jobs, also responsible for childcare. So now, not only were most people at home all the time where they had competing priorities, but we couldn't be there in person to help people along to get to know them as immediately as an individual during class. So pivoting our in-person classes to an online format where we could still maintain that level of connection with our students and make sure that they were getting everything that they needed to be successful in class and then land a job was really challenging. And it took a lot of work on the part of our education and technology teams and our impact team to make sure that we're being creative about the way that we thought of classes. You know, what does a lecture to 110 people look like when it's online? And then how do you get them all to break out into subgroups to work on their specific projects right after in a relatively minimal amount of time and limited resources for them.
Well, that was a fantastic answer and a great segue into my next question. So, Rose, what programming has the LittleBit Foundation created or pivoted, kind of what Tiana had just spoke about, that you've seen substantial attention towards?
Yes. Well, just to also add to what was just mentioned before, you know, LittleBits has always been able to change. We always identify new gaps, new support that's needed, and we are always able to adjust for that. So through our team and working with superintendents, our process is also a one-on-one relationship with students and with schools and with principals and the superintendents. So we had to adjust very, very quickly. We're in 42 schools. We serve over 14,000 students. So creating a distribution model where we could still continue to get right in front of our students, work within systems that were already adapted there, but also build new ones on the go. So moving very quickly, working with those leaders, basic needs, food, education support, supplies. How do we continue to get these things that we were doing for years to our students, but not being able to have that one-on-one? So looking for the distribution models and building on that.
That's amazing what the LittleBit Foundation does. Does anybody want to talk about programming, about what you've done? Okay, Cheryl.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, Colonel. Did you want to go next?
I'm going to follow you, Cheryl. You show us the way.
Okay, great, thank you. So very similar, but a little different than Rose. We also have really, really good relationships with the superintendents, and we're serving 62 schools. And as a United Way agency, we received kind of some information that said that the schools and kids were going to do something differently. So with that, we also launched our virtual program back in March, and we have continued. We haven't stopped one day with our education for our students. And pretty much like Tiana, at first it was a little tough for some of our kids because that's not what we normally do. We're one-on-one and in person as well. But we found that because of change and because we were equipped to have the relationships with the schools and the kids, it became easier. So we were so excited with this virtual piece because as we've talked about on other calls, this is going to have us be able to reach kids that maybe never ever would have had Girls Inc. in their lives. So we're excited and it has been amazing.
Let me just talk about two things quickly. The Salvation Army, two of the areas that we provide service in that are traditional for us is both housing and food. Food pantries over the last 5 years have made a major transition into what we call choice pantries. And what that means is that clients go through the pantry at the Salvation Army, much like you would your local grocery store. You go through, you look at what's there, you select your own groceries, you pick it up, a lot less waste that way, and the people get to be a part of the process. Now, while that's been identified as a best practice, when COVID hit, that model suddenly fell completely apart. And we had to pre-pack the groceries for people who were coming in, which means it's much more staff intensive. And also, people couldn't no longer come in the building during COVID, so we had to do a lot of curbside pantries, those types of things. You also add to that the fact that the volume of people coming to the food pantry increased by about 20 times during the COVID crisis as unemployment ramped up. So that, for us, was a major pivot to an older model, but in a way that was much different. And then in terms of transitional housing, we've made a major pivot to move toward outsourced permanent housing. So we're not using the shelter model where people are massed together, but putting people into their own apartments. And that has ramped up and become more important to us as COVID has hit, because we just can't house that many people together because it increases the risk of cross-contamination.
Wowza. That, isn't it amazing that things that worked in the past will come back, and we hear that a lot. What about services that didn't exist prior to COVID? Rose, I'm going to jump to you on this one. What new services is LittleBit Foundation going to implement? And then Cheryl, I'm going to pull you in after Rose finishes.
So LittleBit always looks for gaps and fills those gaps. And as we were continuing the programs that we're known for, we were also identifying new gaps. As one of our leaders says, we were building the plane while we were flying it. So we identified a gap of those families that could not get to pantries, could not get to distribution sites. And we became a case management, organization that walks with the family through this crisis. So having a one-on-one calls with these families every week, helping identify what they were up against, helping them with new support, other opportunities in the community that we could walk with them and help them through what they were facing, but also the food insecurity, speaking to them because they couldn't get to the distribution sites. These are, 92-year-old grandmas taking care of their 6 grandkids. They didn't have the opportunity to go and find resources. So LittleBit brought those resources to the families, helped them fill out groceries list, had a third party deliver those items directly to those families, and then followed up with them every week. So it's more than stuff, it's ongoing relationships, understanding what our families are up against and walking with them through this crisis. And there's no end to this. Now that it's established, I don't see it ending. I just see it growing and supporting more.
Cheryl, did you want to follow up with some? Okay.
Absolutely. So ours too, because our families trust us and they know us real well. They too came to us and said, hey, how about food? And we said yes for 2 weeks. So we were the initial food delivery organization that they knew about because they trusted us. But again, the relationships are so important. And because of collaborations with the Urban League and Operation Food Search, we then moved them to those organizations that do the food in so many ways, so much better than us. But in addition to that, that freed us up to go back to our virtual programming and continue in that area. And 2 new areas that we have also extended that we did not have before, making. We're making masks for all of our people in our community, and it has Girls Inc. on it, of course, branding. But we also heard from our families that mental health was an issue. So we have 2 MSW PhDs that work with our families because the isolation has become even more an issue, and also the trauma that is being experienced in our community is becoming something that is unbearable for some. So we are now imploring those avenues as well with our families. So we're excited about those 2 new areas. So thank you.
And so let's talk about volunteers, because we all utilize volunteers. We love volunteers. Colonel Dan, I'm going to start with you. How have you engaged volunteers differently during this time? Have you learned anything new about your volunteer community?
Absolutely, and the Salvation Army is dependent on volunteers. Just in the region of St. Louis, we have tens of thousands of volunteers who volunteer for the Salvation Army, from things from ringing the bell at the Christmas season to packing food boxes, to bringing stuff in for our food pantries. So our volunteers are critical for us. Also, the thing that we've discovered that the majority of our volunteers fell into the category of the people who are at most risk because they've got time to give. They are retirees, they're people that are a little older, And so we had to engage with great care for those who would typically come and serve us. So we had to stay engaged virtually with them and encourage them that you have to work behind the scenes now. You can't just come out and begin to roll up your sleeves and go into some of the places that you're going to be at risk. But they got busy and did all sorts of things, making masks, helping us just to stay organized, calling people that are on our rolls who've received service from the Salvation Army to do welfare checks on them to make sure that they were okay. So it was engaging in a less hands-on way, in a more virtual way. One of the things that's very interesting is because we had this 20-time increase in the amount of food that we were giving out, typically we just go to the public and ask our volunteers, go to your pantry, find some canned food, put it in a box, bring it down to the Salvation Army. So imagine how many hands touch that can of SpaghettiOs before it makes it to someone. That model totally out of the window during the COVID crisis. So ways that volunteers had grown accustomed to working with us had to be pivoted and worked a little bit different in terms of volunteers. And each time we have a lifting of regulations, the way we engage with volunteers will have to change continuously as we can do more and more things that are hands-on. We're already anticipating what the kettle season is going to look like. Will people want to put $1 in a plastic kettle without watching it be sanitized again and again as people stand out in front of the retail stores? So that's a massive amount of volunteers who work for us who have to be able to do it in a safe way and feel confident about doing that. So we've changed a lot, and we'll continue to change as we navigate this pandemic, and then just confidence in people after the pandemic dies down.
Wow, it's all those little details that we don't necessarily think about if it doesn't pertain to like our organization. I would have never thought about the red cat, like we always stuff money in there. I would have never thought about the surface. Mind blowing. Rose or Cheryl, did either one of you want to talk about different ways that you're engaging your volunteers?
I'm happy to. Always the safety of our volunteers and our staff and those that we serve are at the top of the list. And we have an army of volunteers. We don't have thousands, but we have 1,000 volunteers. And without that workforce, we cannot continue to serve our students. So we had to become creative. We had to think, how do we keep them safe, but still keep them engaged? Because the beauty of this is people want to continue to help. People want to get behind what we're doing. People know that our kids need them more than ever. So it's just creating opportunities, whether it's doing a drive in your neighborhood for supplies that we need, engaging your friends to help us with, we have a great support with the Girl Scouts and April Showers. Well, April Showers didn't happen this year. So that is a huge amount of supplies that LittleBit will be out. So how do we engage our volunteers to make up that gap of supplies and not getting that? So it's just creating new opportunities. Some of them are shopping for our families that can't get out into the public or get to the food pantries. So it's still keeping that relationship to our kids, that heartbeat of the mission, knowing that they want to help and creating new opportunities daily.
Wonderful. And okay, before we jump to our next slide, let's talk about mental health. We had a lot of questions about mental health of the staff. I'm going to start with Tiana, and I see Cheryl's head bobbing, so then I'm going to jump to you, and then we'll move on to the next slide. How's the well-being?
Yeah, so obviously shifting to all home all the time, as I like to call it, was a big change for most of our staff. So there was about a week up front where everybody really focused on getting oriented to working from home, figuring out what they would need, figuring out their own personal schedules. A lot of us were working from home full-time with kids that we were also homeschooling full-time, and it was a very unusual situation. So giving people time to adjust. We've been really encouraging people to take as much PTO as they need to completely disconnect now that you physically don't leave your office. We're sharing best practices between supervisors of what's really working for different teams within the organization, sharing a lot of mental health resources that are available virtually in the St. Louis area. And we've opened up a lot more office hours. Our head of people ops is spending a lot more time kind of face-to-face but virtual with everybody, checking in, making sure that everybody has a place to go if they're struggling or if they just need to talk something out. And it's been really good. People are really utilizing the additional options. And since the Black Lives Matter movement has picked back up, we've been seeing more engagement with that as well. There have been a lot of specific to that regional and now global event being utilized by our staff as well.
So Dale, I won't say a whole lot more other than we had a mental health day, and we are so blessed, I say, that our board has been so supportive and continuing to ask, what do you need? How can we help? So whatever the staff needs that's going to help them help the girls, we get. So we're really fortunate in that way. And what we also have is the benefit of having 2 to 3 mental health professionals on staff that are also allowing their services or their talk to our staff. So we are very fortunate, and it's going real well.
Love it. All right, let's go to our next slide. Recently, there was a McKinsey article that came out that stated that during a crisis such as COVID, people tend to live in the present rather than toward the future. Seeking consistent information or any credible information at all can be very difficult. According to the article, behavioral science points to an increased desire for transparency, over-communicating, and guidance. Cheryl, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about how are you communicating differently now versus pre-COVID?
Yeah, Tabitha, thank you for that question. I think I'm communicating more. One is I've had now 3 letters that went out to our parents and our community about what we were doing. I've been on TV now 3 times. And also with our staff, we have weekly and sometimes daily meetings because we want to make sure that the communication is very clear, because it's not that face-to-face now, it's virtually. And sometimes when we're emailing or talking virtually, it can get lost. So we're making sure the written communication, the oral communication, and also any other communication is all synthesized so that we're all on the same page. Our board has been part of this all along, so I've been very fortunate to have an outstanding board that is continuing to communicate as well. More touches with our families. So someone said it, we had a weekly call to 1,500 people, if you believe that, checking in to see how the girls are doing and how they're doing as individuals, work, and what could we do? So we've had that type of communication going. This is different because we would see them every day. So now we wanted to know how they were doing, and we put in the pieces to make sure that our communication was clear. The last piece to me is more. I have an inner ear different than before COVID-19 or Black Lives Matters, because I now know that our kids are affected by that. I knew it before, but even more so. So I'm trying my best. This is a hard one kind of for me to stop and listen to what the need from the voices that absolutely it touch. So that's kind of how I'm communicating and communicate differently now. So thank you.
Stop and listen. That's what, isn't that what our parents always told us? God
Absolutely.
gave you 2 years for a reason.
Yes, it's hard sometimes.
You touched on board and board communications with your stakeholders and with the community. I'm going to go to Colonel Dan for this one and ask, how has your board engaged your stakeholders and your community either more than normal or less than normal? How has that involvement been or affected the way that you operate now?
So again, since COVID has started, how we get together as a board, just the basics of how we gather has become different. So now all of our board, again, the ages are a little older, so we've had to go through tutorials with each one of them on how to use all the technology, Zoom or Teams or whatever it happens to be, to get people on. Now, what's interesting is when people couldn't attend a physical board meeting in the past, we've always had a phone-in option. So there's always been the ability to use your telephone to call in. But what we've discovered is since we started using Teams, or since we started using Zoom, and we can actually see each other, the engagement has increased by exponents, because now there's a little more accountability since they can see your face. You can't just have the phone, passively hearing the board meeting happen and doing all the other chores or business that you're trying to get done. You have to be present and be accountable while you're in the meeting. So we found that the engagement has been much better for those who would have called in, but now have to be distanced because of the board meeting. Also, we've had more communication out to the board, more broadcasting to them about what's happening, and also engaging them in more volunteer usage. For example, for about 2 weeks, the Salvation Army was producing hand sanitizer in small bottles for all of our shelters, all of our direct service sites. We're one of the very few places that did not shut down during the pandemic, but because we were on the front lines and serving, all of our people had to be on duty in their places, but it meant that we had to provide those things. You may remember you couldn't go to any of the retail stores and buy a bottle of hand sanitizer for more than a month to resupply what we had used. So we reverted to actually making our own. And so our board members were really good about coming together in a rented warehouse. Again, the space that you would normally use to make that had to increase so that people could be socially distanced while they were making these. So that was something that felt tangible. The board felt good about it because they could actually put their hands on something and do something they knew was, number one, critical, and number two, was going to be immediately used by someone who had to use that on the front line. So we found that this has actually increased our engagement with the board where it could have decreased it.
Great answer. Did anyone else have any comments regarding their board engagement? If not, we're going to talk about your donors. All right, let's talk about the donors. What has been the response from your donors? Fundraising is always a little difficult during this time, but sometimes you have those donors that are just 100% in. So can you share some feedback that you've heard? I'm going to start with Rose, and then anyone else who wants to add some commentary around that as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of comes in line with the communication piece. Telling the story, letting your donors know what you're doing through this time, and engaging them in your new programs, your process. So what I'm learning is that corporate donors want to help us through this. They see what we're doing, they want to get behind. Our individual donors want to get involved. So I have seen an increase in support. At first, when it all started, there was a very quick decrease. And as we tell our story out in the public, as we're on the news or there's articles, people want to get more involved. They want to help. And it's really a beautiful thing to bring people together and to be able to work together and to get continued support and then also new support. So it's been a positive, not easy, but a positive.
Nothing's ever easy.
No.
But you brought up a great point about storytelling. So Tiana, everybody knows storytelling allows the listener to actively participate in a conversation. So when you're speaking about LaunchCode, how has the art of storytelling helped shift or change the perception or the programming or just the communication efforts during COVID?
Yeah, it's changed quite a lot. Initially, of course, you have to tell the story of how your organization's services are still continuing, whether that looks different or some things are maintaining the way that they usually happened. So we instituted a specific place to go for all that information. There is a constantly updated page on our site's blog that has information specific to a location that we operate in, because now different places have different rules in effect. So, you know, the situation may be different city to city or event to event or class to class. So that is just consistently updated every time we learn more information. And then telling the story of our launch coders is, of course, the most important story that we tell, both for our donors and for our hiring partners in the community. So finding creative ways to make sure that they still get personal stories and feel like they get to understand individual launch coders and who they are and where they're coming from and why they would be great assets to any team. So we're doing a lot more cultivating launch coders' own words on why they would be a great hire, getting little snippets of their story from them, and being able to share in their own words with an image of the person or a video in some cases where they're really talking to the donor or the hiring partner has made a big difference. We're just not able to have those events in-house that we would normally have where they would actually meet face-to-face. There's no resume review afternoons in the Mentor Center anymore.
If I could just add for a moment, especially tying those two things together, storytelling and attracting and talking to your donors, is we have a group of people who do fundraising for us year round. And typically they go out and do a lot of things person to person and ask for donations. During this period, we reversed it a bit. They were calling our donors, our traditional donors, to hear their stories. Tell us how you're doing. Tell us how you're managing. Rather than calling and asking for a gift, we were asking them to tell us their story and what they're going through and how their businesses were impacted. And it was eye-opening to hear what some of our donors were going through. And I did see someone had a question about attracting new donors. For us, we actually engaged a firm to do a mailer for us to talk about what the Salvation Army was doing, the increased capacity of giving things out, and to ask people to consider being a donor. It is, it's critical to remember that that people are suffering during the same time. So you have to be very sensitive as you're reaching out for new donors, understanding that some people's businesses have been impacted and they're not able to give in the same way.
That's great. And we'll talk about fundraising too in just a little bit. Let's pivot to events right now, because we all know the power of the human connection. And a lot of nonprofits rely on events to sustain their income. So has anyone started with pivoting their events to virtual? Rose, let's start with you. If you have, tell us about that and what you find works and doesn't work.
So in mid-April, we had our virtual run. It's Laura's run benefiting the LittleBit Foundation. Laura Hediger on Channel 4. It's an annual event. And when this hit, we were like, what do we do? How do we move forward? And we created a virtual run. And we had no idea how this was going to work, to be honest with you, when we started. But we were very successful. People wanted to get out. They wanted to practice. They wanted to run. They wanted to be in teams together. And I have to keep coming back to people want to help any way they can. So we were able to pivot, do this run virtually, and we met our goal. And it was a huge success. Now we're looking at our large gala, our Join the Journey Gala, which is our biggest fundraiser in October. And I think it's going to be somewhat of a virtual, somewhat of a small gathering, but it's kind of cool because we can be creative around this. We can create something new that's exciting. We can create a new way to approach this and to tell our story. And I do think we have to be very sensitive and not always ask for money, but it's engaging those around you. It's not always about the ask. And I just think there's a great opportunity for us to help our kids and to continue to tell our story and engage in new ways.
That's it. Does anyone feel comfortable holding in-person events? Cheryl, I'm going to start with you on this one. That seems to be a very big trending question that we get, is when are you going to be comfortable enough to hold those in-person events?
Yeah, thank you. We're going to follow the data. Data never tells the story, actually. And so if the data suggests that it's an increase, we will not be holding anything in person. So we're going to continue to follow the research and make decisions based on that. So we have no plans currently to have an in-person event currently. So that's what we're going to do.
That sounds smart. How about sponsorships and donations? Goes back to that funding question. Are you finding that your sponsors are willing to donate virtual events, or are they allocating their sponsorship and donor dollars to potential events in 2021? How are you navigating that process? Tiana, let's start with you.
Yeah, so we recently had our annual trivia night event for LaunchCode, which is not just a fundraiser, but also just like a super fun thing for our community to get together and do. At first, we were really stumped about how to have that in person. It's usually between 100 and 200 people crammed into our Mentor Center on Delmar. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen this year. But our fundraising team got really creative and figured out that we could use a lot of the same technology we're using to hold our classes, where you have a large lecture with hundreds of people, and then small breakout groups where groups need to be able to talk on their own and then come back to the large lecture if they come back to the instructor of the lecture if they need to. So we used a lot of that same technology and had essentially the same thing for trivia. You would be hearing from the MC for trivia. You would get the rounds introduced, and then round winners read out. And in between, everybody would break into their teams in private chat rooms, basically, so that they could work together at solving all of the questions without, giving away the answers to neighboring tables. It worked really well. We were just humbled to wind up raising twice as much as we did last year at that event. Even though it was a complete experiment, everybody was really with us all the way, and our community was just amazing. And a little bit on when do you feel comfortable holding in-person events. We actually have an experiment coming up with our next event, our Moonshot Awards, where we honor other people and organizations in the St. Louis area doing great work. Is going to be held July 10th at the Drive-In St. Louis. So we're going to have people attend in their vehicles. If they feel comfortable, they can get out of their vehicles and sit at a table where they'll still be socially distanced from others. The event will be taking place up on stage. There will be concessions that can be safely delivered to your vehicle, and you're able to participate in the whole thing really as if you were there, just you have your own table and it's your car. We think it's going to be great. And it should be a really fun event. And this is just not something we were willing to give up. It's really important to us to honor all of the other nonprofits and great individuals who are doing really innovative things to make St. Louis better.
The Moonshot Awards are amazing. That's a phenomenal idea. And I hope everybody listening steals it.
We attribute it to Lori and Kathy and fundraising. They're amazing and have come up with so many great ideas during this time.
Does anybody else have comments as it relates to donors or sponsors for events? If not, we're going to move into continuing with the fundraising theme of how your organization is doing at this time as it relates to revenue. Rose, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I love that event idea. I think I'm going to have to steal it. Thank you. So as I had mentioned, when COVID first hit, we saw a drastic stop in donations coming in. I feel like everyone was just trying to settle, get their feet on the ground, understand the impact. as we've been able to tell our story, get the information out, have people, you know, and somebody else mentioned checking in to see how our donors are doing, all through like this relationship based. We've, I just spoke to my COO. We had a great month last month. We overshot our budget and our goal. But looking forward, you know, to be honest, it's unknown. It's unknown. And my thought and my process is to be aware of the unknown, to understand that there's opportunity in unknown, to know that people in the community really want to continue to help those kids that need it the most. So it may take different approaches, but we have to adjust. It may take new ways of thinking about things, but we just adjust. So in time of crisis, it's not to stay the same. It's to, how do we continue to engage? How do we use this difficult time in a positive way for our kids to reach out, to find out how everybody's doing, to tell our stories, and to see if they do want to engage. So I think maybe the amount of work and the amount of touches will increase, but that's okay. The unknown, we just continue to adjust and be creative. Barriers, you understand what the barrier is and you work through it or get around it. There's no one answer. It's going to be a moving target, and we're just going to have to continue to be creative and not give up and be positive. And when we hit something, we look for something else. That's all I can think of. That's where I'm going.
I love that there's opportunities in the unknown. That's a golden nugget for this webinar. What about state and federal support? Colonel Dan, you may want to talk about this one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Salvation Army has had a good success in using funds from both state and government funding, especially if they're highly technical and highly regulated, just because we do well in those areas. For example, the VA has just increased a grant, or just in the process of increasing a grant for our homeless veterans program. Because again, the state and federal government have received funds from the national government to be able to dispense through the individual states. And because we already have a partnership with the VA, and because we already are going through this highly regulated process of receiving both state and federal funds, we can continue to do that. So we've seen some increases there, which has been helpful. I might just say a word or two about the last topic about just fundraising in general. During the summer, the Salvation Army operates typically at a deficit. And for St. Louis, that deficit usually is about $500,000 a month in deficit. So we're living off of the December, November funds that came in earlier in the year. This year, we're actually running a surplus rather than running that deficit, because we've done very well with fundraising for COVID. The great unknown for us, and I think for other nonprofits, is what is going to happen for us. Our biggest fundraising season is November, December. Will we have success during that period, or have people given what they're going to give us this year already and earmarked it for COVID? If that's the case, that could be catastrophic for us in terms of next year's budgeting. If people aren't going to support the Christmas campaign. So we're preparing ourselves for what could be a massive drop-off in that end of the year funding that we've already received during the COVID funding. So it's the unknown. I'd like to be very positive and think that Christmas is going to do very well, but we have a $6 million Christmas campaign every year to try to raise funds. So we'll have to see how that's impacted and make sure that we're being cautious with the funds we receive now in case we have to use those into the next year.
So many bits of great advice. Okay, before we close our webinar, I would love to have just one golden nugget from each one of you. I'm going to start with Tiana, and then move to Cheryl, Rose, and then finish with Colonel Dan. What's one golden nugget that our attendees can take away
I think if you just employ enough creative thinking, you can find a way to do virtually everything you were doing before and maybe more in a way that's genuinely helpful to people. It's just a lot of thinking outside the box.
So for me, it's agility. The organizations that are going to survive is going to be agile enough to watch and see the change and see what's needed. So being agile would be what I would say is going to propel us into next.
I would say having a keen focus on the mission and not forgetting why we're in this and how that's the motivator. That's what drives us to do what we do and to continue to be creative and move. Just not losing focus on that we're needed now more than ever.
Those are all great nuggets. I think if I could add anything, it is that the commodity that we are delivering is whatever it's used to be. That's our mission. So for the Salvation Army, that's food, that's shelter, that's financial assistance. Right now, top shelf commodity that we're delivering to the public is safety. Whatever we're giving, we have to be able to do that in a way that keeps people safe. So that the primary commodity that we're delivering is safe delivery of whatever it happens to be. And I agree with Cheryl too. We have to have strategic agility so that mission is central, but method is negotiable.
I love it. Well, thank you to all of our panelists and to the Chamber team for organizing this webinar. This webinar has been recorded and it will be available after we conclude. Please join us next Friday, June 26th, to hear from Maxine Clark, founder of Build-A-Bear and Building a Company and Community with Heart. And a big thank you to our sponsors, Technology Partners, and Kitty Academy, who is serving St. Louis healthcare and essential businesses at this time of crisis. For all the news and updates, please visit the St. Louis Regional Chamber's website. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.